So if I could ask everybody to please share an example of a recent investment that you think is, representative of the kinds of things you like to do.
So one is a company called Rodan Therapeutics. It's a company that is developing epigenetics therapies for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease and mood disorders. And why that I picked that as an example is we seeded that company in collaboration with Atlas Venture, where this was it had been incubating, and it was just the two of us that seeded this in the form of a convertible note. We did that because it was incredibly rapid, and that's one of the things I think that we would like to do in our new incarnation of JJDC, so that we could get the science moving. So really, it was a matter of how do I get the solutions moving. That met its milestones, and the actual creation of those milestones was something that was very detailed and driven by my R&D partners at Janssen R&D. The company met their milestones. We funded the Series A. And what's also very interesting is we have provided our compound library as one of the sources of chemical equity, and there's leads that have been identified out of that from Janssen with no strings attached. We also have a lead from the Broad that we're pursuing in parallel, and we are also working to now expand the syndicate. And one of the things that we are doing is our internal experts, because we've within Janssen have invested a lot in Alzheimer's disease, have provided a lot of expert input in terms of diligence for other venture firms who are now appreciating that scientific input and the potential exit back to Janssen of this asset. So that's one company that was an example of seed to Series A and the value add that we bring as a strategic, scientifically as well with capital.
So not most recently investment. However, we invested to the Solasos, Canadian company, so led by the actually SR1. So we syndicate with SR1 and other investors, and because the company is doing generating the nephrology area, acute kidney injury. So the very huge unmet needs are existing, and our parent pharma is looking at the AKI or nephrology setting. So during the diligence stages, we usually use our pharma company's asset in terms of their resource or their knowledge. And so after the investment, we made our parent pharma company independently made an agreement, confidentiality agreement, to look at the progress. And so for future, I believe they are going to be a deal. But it depends on the situation and the condition of that.
So I'd like to bring up two investments just to break the rules. I mean, I'm a Dane and I'm jet lagged, and Danes normally break rules. But just to show you diversity and being here in Boston, we've done two investments recently in Boston. One is in Sidon, which is an orphan drug accelerator, incubator, really an experienced orphan drug disease team building a portfolio of orphan rare disease programs, de-risking them, doing all the assessment, and then there's a solid syndicate behind that then already has the financing in place for what moves into real development. So that's one end of the spectrum. We also recently did an investment, not in a sexy technology, but in a commercially really experienced and smart team who is taking IV, well-known generic drugs and converting them to sub-Q, outpatient, home drugs. So thinking about furosemide, IV, you need to dry out heart patients, take them out of the hospital and the emergency room, give them a sub-Q pump, send them home, press a button, and you're close to your toilet and you'll dry out in 3 or 4 days.
I'll give you two examples. And again, I think it's interesting to highlight that there are a wide range of opportunities that we will invest in. And it really depends on breakthrough technologies, great team, and solving big problems. So the first was a seed investment in a company this year called Lysosomal Therapeutics, Inc. It was Gaucher's disease is what they're focusing on, but with a broader application in Parkinson's. So with Genzyme, a very likely and obvious strategic fit with a great team. The second, Immune Design, later stage, a Series B that was in 2013. And I think what's important about that deal was the fact that in August, Sanofi announced a partnership with them around allergy, which I think was a perfect metric for us as a team to invest in a company. They ended up going public within a year, and also we signed a partnership with our broader organization.
Thanks. I'll give you two brief examples, but they're the same flavor. I mentioned we've done a couple structured buyout deals, and what we're doing here is finding pharma-based technology that can be ported over to ag in a way that Monsanto can do the ag work by contract from the startup, and we can do the plant testing, we can do different disease testing, and that way the startup doesn't have to invest any capital in ag-specific work, but can put their technology to work in ag. First one was a company that we were introduced to by Atlas through our seed fund alliance called Nimbus that does computational chemistry against a particular target that we were interested in for fungicide discovery. So in that case, we pre-wired milestones for additional funding as well as a buyout if everything hits, and we've got some really interesting, nice new results from that investment that was made last year. The second one is a company that we formed with MIT with Dan Anderson on RNA delivery that we're working with for agricultural purposes. So in that case, they used the lipid technology out of Anderson's lab, wrap it in our double-stranded RNA, and then we do all the testing. Again, that's pre-wired. The point that I'm making is pharma technology can be applied to ag, and startups don't have to build a ton of ag expertise if you can do the right deal.
And I'll mention one investment that we have done recently with Marian. It's a company called Navitor, which was based on 3 or 4 years of work that had been done in a previous entity of the company around metabolic disease. And as the company was maturing, they identified a very interesting technology platform being developed by David Sabatini, who's a tremendous researcher, has been at the forefront of amino acid metabolism and the mTOR complex since it was discovered, because he was the one who discovered it. And George Vlasik, who is a tremendous drug developer who we knew from Citrus and has been a real drug discovery and development leader and business leader for years. And David Sabatini and George Vlasik got together with the previous company and said, you know, this is an opportunity to do something really different. And they turned the company into Navitor. At the same time, they decided to bring in some additional capital. And so there were several really great investment firms already involved, including J&J, Polaris, Atlas, and they reached out to us because we had worked with all of them, and they said, you know, this is really, really cool science with really good people, and they need a lot of money, and that sounds like something SR1 would do. And we said, wow, this is really, really cool science, they need a lot of money, and we like the people, this sounds like something we should do. And we ended up leading a approximately $30 million Series A for that company earlier this year. All right, before we keep going with the moderator discussion, I'll just ask, are there any audience questions?
There seems to be a resurgence in venture capital available to pharmaceuticals in particular.
I think there's several reasons for that. The first is there were fewer funds and fewer dollars on the institutional side. Second, if you look at the trend of corporate venture and the participation in Series A and early stage deals, SVB did a study and it was like 9% 5-7 years ago. Now it's up to 35% last year. So it's absolutely increasing. And I think it's because there was so little money around from the institutional side that it had to fill that gap. Because if you look at actually over 10 years, the dollars gone in every year has stayed about the same. It's about $4 or $5 billion. So the dollars haven't increased over the past 10 years, but I think you've seen corporates help fill that gap.
I think the other is that the IPO market has been really good, so there's been a lot of exits with some really significant returns that allow that capital flow back. And that's coupled with the fact that the farm pipelines are being filled with external innovation, and with very limited assets out there from small biotechs, the competitive nature of getting those assets in has really driven the prices up, because you'd rather have a really good pipeline that you're willing to pay a strategic value for than no pipeline at all. And I think the combination of those two things, both the IPOs and then acquisitions and high-priced BD deals for early-stage assets, have really fueled the fire in terms of allowing more funds to be successfully raised.
There's been a real shift in the dynamics of the venture industry. Basically, a lot of people left the industry, and it took time for them to clear out. And I think that they were cluttering the industry. They were not interested in innovation. They were looking for de-risked assets and reformulations, which was a way to make money before. It's not a way to make money in the future. They were a lot of folks used to a different FDA environment, and that just doesn't exist anymore. And so I think there's been a shift in the venture community, and people have just changed their expectations. People have left the industry, new people have come in, including some corporates who have a much higher risk tolerance. And I think that's changed the way that we respond to the really cool ideas that entrepreneurs bring to us.
What's the best way to approach you guys?
That's easy. Approach us. Send me a note. Connect me on LinkedIn. Find a mutual connection. Meet me at this conference. The harder question is, what should you do after you connect with me? So maybe I'll pass that to the panel.
You're right. I mean, send a note, use a connection, and then have a clear, brief description of what it's all about. If it's complicated, then it will probably also get complicated later on. So I think that's key. And then keep going. I can see a number of our investments are coming out of companies that we've spoken to for some time, maybe even years. And then suddenly sort of it all shapes up in a way that now it works. And it's nice to have followed the company before we invest, and we go in generally a little later than, for example, SR1 and JJDC.
Maybe, can you guys hear without the microphone? Ish in the back? No.
Not well.
I was just kidding. So, one of my pet peeves is ask up front what types of things that we invest in. So many companies will send an email and say, here's what we're doing, and here's the science, and this is why you should invest. And we want to make it more efficient for you, so ask up front. If here's my company, is this the type of thing that would be of interest to you? And I think having that conversation is the most efficient way for you guys, not to, if you're looking for fundraising, not to waste your time. Because it's not worth your time if ultimately we're going to go and have 1 call, 2 calls, and diligence, and if we're not going to get there. So I think try to have the conversation early as to what the fund will like to invest in.
What are you investing?
What do you have? Huge unmet medical needs with great teams and solving these big problems. And I tend to be agnostic to the stage, whether it's very early preclinical, which is the company, the first one I mentioned, which is lysosomal therapeutics. I mean, they are several years away from an IND, to immune design, which has filed 3 INDs in the past year. So again, think about unmet medical needs with great teams.
I think another thing that's very important, specifically for SR1, but probably for my colleagues as well, is differentiation. And one of the struggles that I have as an investor is distinguishing between novelty and differentiation. And I see just hundreds of really novel technology concepts, company concepts every year. But when I really start to dig in and diligence, only a few dozen stand out as truly differentiated concepts. And I think, what's the difference, right? What distinguishes the differentiation from the novel? One is the durability of that novelty, right? So it's cool and new today. How quickly will competitors catch up is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And when I see something that's really interesting and new, and I start to dig in on how it was developed, and sometimes I hear, well, our academic founders spent 10 years working on this in 3 different labs, and they've built their careers around this field of biology, and they've identified a number of unique insights here that they're giving to us in a proprietary manner. Now, I hear that and I think, wow, this is going to be a lasting competitive advantage for this company. Sometimes I hear a really cool technology paired with just a tremendous entrepreneur who's made money before. That's very differentiated, right? Because it's not just the technology anymore, it's a technology and a team. Question I'll give to the panel is advice for entrepreneurs who are starting companies. And my advice for all entrepreneurs is always build a team. You know, think about what the company needs, not just the technology, but the company. What capabilities are you bringing to the table, and what's missing in a very kind of honest, self-aware manner, and start to bring people in, even as consultants or as advisors or even friends. Hire people if you can afford to. Invite experienced entrepreneurs to advise you and sit on your boards. If you build a team around yourself, it will make it a lot more interesting for me.
2 things I'd say. One, and to echo what Vikas was mentioning, teams are important. Let me say that again. Teams are really important for any venture capitalist. So if you're a first-time CEO, surround yourself with great people. Figure out how to do it as advisors, as board members, whatever. Second piece of advice is, if you ask for money, you're going to get advice. But if you ask for advice, you're more likely to get money.
I think that was actually a very good piece of advice, and it's not often said, but I think you will often see VCs saying, not really interested, or this is not for us strategically, or the technology doesn't fit. And very often, it's actually because of the lack of a team, or lack of the key components in a team. And it's difficult enough as it is. If the team is not there, or key people from the team, it becomes an extra hurdle.
Yes, I would reiterate the team, and that's expertise on the science side as well as the track record. I'd also emphasize the good knowledge of competitive landscape, because one of the biggest pet peeves are companies that come up that don't really have a good grip on what the competition is, both on the science side as well as a particular business competition, and it might be different certainly outside of therapeutic agents, but the competitive landscape is really important. And as has been mentioned, the intellectual property, a good grasp of the intellectual property and how it could impact your business plan is really important, and that's the advice. And I would also say for us, if we don't go and make an investment, off the bat, keep the dialogue going, because we've had a lot of continuing dialogues that have blossomed into something really cool that ended up different than the initial conversation. So keeping that dialogue going, where we can provide industry expertise to match up with the entrepreneurs' ideas, is we found very, very rewarding.
Do your portfolios underperform or outperform the venture capital, life science, non-pharma?
I can't answer that. We've only been around for 4.5 years, so proof is in the pudding. When I look around on the corporate VC side, I think you can see many of them associated with some of the good exits you see around. Whether that in sort of totality makes them better or equal, I don't know, but there is evidently for many corporate VCs a strategic component, which means that they will go in early and take a higher technical risk.
I think I'd seen somewhere that within healthcare, so this is not quite the answer to the question, but it's directional. If there is a strategic compared to in companies that have syndicates without a strategic, the exits are higher. Or in other words, there's a better return, which actually makes sense. But if I'm telling you that that's my goal, is to acquire the asset or the company, and I'm working to shape it in that direction, there's a higher chance that there's going to be that exit.
So I might ask the panel one more question, which is if you could name one technology or therapeutic area that you're actively interested in today, personally interested in, Whether or not you would make an investment in that space, you want to learn about it, you want to meet more companies in that space.
I can start out. An area that we've looked into, done one investment, and looking to do more is dermatology. An area that hasn't really moved a lot in decades. And I'm not talking about psoriasis and antibodies, but broader dermatology, which we think is an area of some really interesting opportunities with a lot of biology, new biology that hasn't really been pursued because the classical dermatology companies have not done a lot of innovative new drug target research.
For us, that area that I'm getting really interested in is what we would call precision agriculture. So for Monsanto, we're a genetics company, as I mentioned, so we've got run hundreds of millions of data points, had gigantic statistical models on plant breeding to drive yield increase, basically to feed the planet in the upcoming decades. When we bought Climate Corp last year, they've got gigantic statistical models on how to predict weather and crop yields. And so what we've done by bringing our companies together is really try to deliver to growers, not only in the U.S., but hopefully soon to be around the world, advice on how to increase the profitability of their farm. And so what Climate has is climate.com. So there's a mobile platform on iPads. In case you don't know, all farm equipment now have iPads on there. They drive themselves, highly automated. So what we're looking at is software for the farm. We're looking at hardware. We're looking at robotics for the farm. We're looking at remote sensing. We're looking at satellite imaging, image analysis, all wrapped up into how do we statistically make advice to a farmer that he can increase his profitability, as an app on his iPad. So lots of companies, especially on the West Coast, that weren't able to go into think about agriculture are now putting hardware and software to work in agriculture.
Innovative technologies, groundbreaking technologies in oncology, rare disease, neurology, autoimmune disease, diabetes. We're a big company. I like it all.
So for us, one area is the microbiome. And it's because it's big and we think there is a lot of potential, but it's also because by nature, it's not something that we have a lot of experience with. So we have we have an investment in a company called Vedanta that has a consortia of microbes that we think has the ability to impact systemically the immune system. But we think the microbiome has potential in diabetes, obesity, and a range of other areas. It's just a matter of how you get your arms around it, and we don't have a lot of internal capability, so an investment is a wonderful way of doing that. There's also potential because we have a consumer group to have nutraceuticals, probiotics. You go into Costco and you see, improve your gut health, but there's no data on that. It's not optimized, and so it's an area that we want to play in. But from both a scientific, regulatory, commercial perspective, we do need to test and learn, and we think that's an exciting place to invest in.
So we are very actively looking for the investment opportunity on the rare disease setting. So as I mentioned before, it's a little bit harder to set up from the scratch in our parent pharma's R&D capability. So we are looking at preferably the 18 or 2 years to IND. That's our zone for.
And I'll mention two. So within neurodegenerative, I personally am particularly interested in ALS. I've been spending a bit of time trying to understand what's going on in neurodegenerative, and I struggle with neurodegenerative because the animal models happen in a very different place than they do in almost every other therapeutic area, and you rely on really complex induced pluripotent stem cell assays, co-culture assays, which are really challenging, astrocytes and neurons together. The animal models are very expensive and hard to do, but the unmet need is really clear, and the molecular biology is just exploding, particularly around ALS. And I think that there's an opportunity for biotech companies to take on that really challenging development paradigm, which a lot of big companies I think are going to be afraid to do. And you're going to have intense competition from companies like Biogen and Jason over here. But there's going to be a huge desire for interesting assets, even around IND stage, I think. And so I've been spending a fair amount of time trying to think about opportunities in ALS. And I'll mention a second thing, which is more of a holy grail. So while I'm not strategically aligned with GSK, I do have common interests as GSK. And so one of the areas that GSK is very interested in is vaccines. So within vaccines, one of the real big challenges that we've been struggling with is how do you get immune response in the right place? So for some vaccines, you want the immune response systemically. For some, you want it at certain mucosal surfaces. For some, you want it in the lung. And we don't have a good way of designing the location of immune responses right now. And if anybody has even a semblance of an idea on how to crack that problem, we'd probably be very interested in that. Okay, thank you very much.